The sixth witness represents the anchorite or hermit revolution of late antiquity that engendered first Oriental and later Western monasticism. This was the source of the communism of the Western monastery and the spiritual movements. It's obvious that the retreats of hermits from the city can only be understood in terms of extrapolating impulses that had already been explored. The oldest anchorite thought was the pursuit of Platonism, Kenoticism, and the philosophy of Timon by other means. And from that time on, the other means were primarily Christian and Gnostic. If we try to bring Plato's heaven, Diogenes' trash can, and Timon's forest together in one place, we arrive directly in the Egyptian desert, a day's hike south of Alexandria, where the first athletes of Christ wanted to challenge and annihilate the world with their exercises. The patriarch of the Desert Fathers was Anthony, a young Christian who left his city to coerce his soul to blissfulness in the empty graves from the time of the pharaohs. The Anchorite revolution that swept the whole of Egypt, Palestine and Syria with a mood of desert madness between the 3rd and 6th century anticipated the relative psychopolitical collapse of the ancient polis. It may have been business as usual in the city, in the millennium between Pericles and Theodosius, but the souls of city dwellers had experienced too much for them to carry on playing the same simple game of contests, victories and fame. They would have been compelled to realize that desire was dreaming of more ambitious goals. Diogenes must have seen out of the corner of his eye that somebody else was surpassing him and trying to see the world with universal eyes. Alexander of Macedonia was the first person who was sufficiently unrestrained and enough of a genius to boot out Pindar's abstinence and openly reach for divine honours in his lifetime. Even Middle and Late Platonism started playing provocatively with the fire of mania, and explicitly told its adepts that theosis, the deification of the soul, was the real justification for existence in the best life, the theoretical one. In 27 BC, Octavian assumed the divine title of Augustus in Rome, and had himself fated as Saviour, Deliverer, and Redeemer. Following that, mere mortals were completely uninteresting for a whole era. Promulgating such mysteries deprived the urban psycho-reactor of its effective fuel rods. The glowing coals of mania burned more slowly, and the wish for deification was transformed into urban ambition. Its success evaporated, and it finally vanished altogether. Instead, souls burned out directly in religious mania, or were extinguished in numbed horror of urban daily life. This explains why, until the time of Luther, the West could accept a division of humankind into clergy and lay society, cum grano salis. It corresponded closely to the collective psychological reality. In a time span of over 1,000 years, there were only two major groups of human beings, those crazy about God and burnt-out souls. It took until the new urban culture of the late Middle Ages for a middle ground of citizens to re-emerge. These citizens combined secular orientations with increased psychological vitality, the matrix of modern non-religious vitality. Christianity scored its first points in the general psycho-political climate of late antiquity. In the cities it found a new, initially secret theme for assembling. It exalted the more or less euphoric love relationship between brothers and sisters into an invisible spiritual city. It rechanneled the flight from the city by reinterpreting the desert as the cruel, open-air temple of the new god, who potentially offered salvation. This explains why desert sanctity is yet more than a radical version of Timon's position. Anthony, Macarius, Onufrius, Pachomius, and others would not have spent their whole lives in the Theban and Nitrian deserts merely because they loathed Alexandria. For these men, the desert lived because it was a place where God could be sought. Of course, the Christian anchorites benefited from the Neoplatonic removal of inhibitions. Certainly for some time by then, becoming Zeus had been regarded, at least in Hellenophile circles, as a noble idea and attainable by human beings. The new theosis in the desert was simply the peaking of such trends in a type of Christian athleticism. Hugo Ball's essay on Byzantine Christianity, published in 1923, contains a very beautiful description of simple Egyptian monks as athletes of mourning and hermits as athletes of despair. Both these clerical types are athletes who specialise in not playing in the city's games. Their Olympic Games was called humility, and the goal of their training was not to win in city affairs. Monastic psychology made a frontal attack on the urban ego. It deconstructed the phallic potential type of human who was interested in reputation as reflected in victors, gains security through property, and brags and pays with sexual energy. For the monk, the city is nothing but a recharging station for ego batteries that are to be discharged in the desert under the proper rules. The statement of our sixth witness concerns how this discharge is carried out. I shall cite an excerpt from the 52nd letter written from the desert by Evagrius of Pontus, around 345 to 99, in which he chides a brother monk who had tried to draw him back into the urban psychosphere with the wrong kind of praise. We're not writing a letter in reply to you, but a very serious reproof, because you have sent us a letter that inspires terrible feelings of proud boasting in us. I was disgusted at reading your eulogy. That is the reward for proud boasting, for it is unseemly to write in that manner to people who have withdrawn from the world, and to enfeeble their souls that are weak from passions and love vanity. Instead, one must write the opposite to you. Remain sitting in the desert, wretched souls. Serve God with fasting and prayer. Do not look at the world that often made you wretched in many different ways. Remember your old shipwrecks. Remember the thieves, how often they brought you low. Do not forget the sea and the wild waves. Remember the stench of greed that comes out of your throat and craves pleasures and plenty. Remember how many shipwrecks the greed for money has caused, and how many wars among men it has inspired. Incarcerations and prisons and a multitude of different kinds of torture instruments. For this reason, the blessed apostle, considering these things, aptly called the greed for possession the root of all evil. But what should we say about the ideas of proud boasting or arrogance, or about the sudden hurricanes of heresy that have flooded the ship and covered the pilot's intellect? These and others should be preached for the ears of those who have abandoned the world. Those who write eulogies for somebody who has gone away from the inhabited world is like a man who throws woods or twigs or tow into a burning oven to make it burn evermore. Alexandria's strength lay in the fact that people in that city truly enjoyed reading such writings. They reassured the city dwellers that they weren't really missing anything by remaining in their villas and workshops, their canteens and catechism schools, their libraries and brothels, and tirelessly discussing the latest reports of new records in the humility championships out there in the hostile desert.